is defined as over a meter in depth and flowing water. And by 2100, that flood frequency will be 50%. So every other year, essentially, we could expect that level of flood event. So, okay, Tamsin went over this a little bit. The options: protect, accommodate, retreat. Likely to be some combination of those. So, looking at things like raising coastal and river dikes, offshore barrier islands, designing buildings so that they can get wet, reorganizing crops so that the ones that are closest to the dikes are resilient to saline soils or water, manage retreat, complete retreat. So we are just in this first phase right now of a 3-year, hundreds of thousands of dollars invested by the city to do a really extensive stakeholder and public engagement process. And similar to Vancouver, we're really asking, what are the values of the community? What is it that concerns you about these issues? And using that as a frame to then evaluate the different options that we just that I just talked about and more. So I'm really excited that this is underway, and you'll hear more about that later on the tour. So I won't be able to get into this, but to say that we are looking at urban forest, looking at increasing the diversity of our street trees, doing trials of drought-tolerant tree species, and I'm hoping that in the next few years we can actually be looking more at where we're selecting our seed stock. So maybe we're still planting cedars, but it's cedars from Oregon instead of Vancouver Island to be adaptable to future climate. Ecosystems, we've had a lot in the last couple of years, particularly with our OCP, to protect our riparian areas more effectively, to, as I mentioned, purchase those and otherwise have dedicated those swaths of ecosystem land that are contributing to resilient biodiversity. And an area that I'm hoping that is within my purview to move more into over the coming months is really looking at urban heat island. It's a health issue, so it's one of those things that kind of falls through the cracks, but there's so much that municipalities can and should be doing, and a lot of them are, I think, low-hanging fruit to ensure that we are planning to keep our cities cool. So I think I'll leave it there. Sorry to have gone way over.
Thanks very much, Megan.
Yeah.
Well done. Next we have Lloyd B. with the City of Richmond.
Hey everyone. Well, I won't go over our plans. Especially for people that aren't from around here, I thought I'd give us a little context here. Is this the light? This is Richmond. We're kind of like the Netherlands of the Lower Mainland. We're kind of completely in the floodplain and completely behind dikes, unlike our neighbors. We're kind of 1 meter above mean sea level, which means that twice a day at high tide we're potentially below sea level, which we definitely want to keep out of our city. But we're a city of about 220,000, 130 square kilometer island is the main island, Lulu Island. $50 billion worth of assets we're kind of protecting, and about 40% of the island is still in farm production. Infrastructure challenges for us. I am an engineer. It sounds like I'm the only one up here, but things that we worry about that make it challenging for us is that we're in a very flat topography, very low lying, and high water table and very soft soils, which are challenging to maintain what we are. I'm going to talk, I'm not going to go into all of our policies and things. We have, similar to Surrey, we've got a gazillion policies from our greenways strategy to everything else, but I'm going to focus a little bit more on a little bit more of the climate change stuff, not necessarily all the mitigation stuff and that we do, like our district energy utilities and things like that. But what are the climate change risks that we're looking at? Like we're looking at sea level rise, right? That's kind of a big one for us. Like I said, we're below water twice a day, so something we've got to pay attention to. One of my colleagues, he very astutely once said, no dike, no Richmond, and so that's why that's the top of the list. But we do also agree that there's probably going to be higher temperatures. I don't think anyone on any of this stuff can put their fingers exactly on what the dates are and what the temperatures are going to be. But unless, most of us, I think, can all agree that temperatures and sea level rise are going to happen, and we're probably going to have a lower snowpack because of that, which may lead to less water supply. We had a drought sort of situation in our rainforest, and we can talk a little bit more about kind of how water works in the lower mainland. But we have long dry summers, and we're reliant on snowpack to actually carry us through the late summer and early fall as far as drinking water goes. And we're also thinking that we're going to have more extreme weather events. The general thought, I think, is that we're going to have less overall rainfall, but maybe we'll have more intense rainfall. So that's another one of the things that we may have to address. But these things are all highly variable, and I don't think that anyone can say with certainty where we're going to end up. I included the one little chart from, how do I go back? From the province, which just talks about sea level rise, and even on their chart, you can see they've got a fair amount of variability, and they've kind of split the difference with the average. And I think that's what most people kind of use as a target, but recognizing that it could be anywhere within that gray area. In fact, it could be way worse. Like, I'm certain that I'm surprised Townsend didn't point out the NOAA study that lately that came out that said 2.5 meters of sea level rise for us by 2021. Okay, so what can we do about that, right? What can we do? So basically, we've got a flood management strategy that tries to address all of the flooding issues, right? Like it informs a whole bunch of other things that we're doing, like our dike master planning. The dike master plan clearly, as I think everyone said, like the engineering's no longer this kind of like, yeah, we're going to build it to this level and that's it for forever. Certainly in terms of diking and things, it's more like, okay, maybe 4.7 will be good by 2100, but it's going to be different beyond that. So our dike master planning strategy sort of addresses that and starts setting targets for current dike elevations and where they're going to be, quite frankly. One of the challenges with increasing the dike of a height of a dike in a urban environment, beyond, like I said, the public scorn for not seeing the water anymore, is that people have buildings there and stuff. Like people get pretty upset when they come along and you say, hey, we're going to build a dike in your neighborhood, and it's actually going to be in your front lawn, and we're going to need your house. That's where the development community is pretty handy for us in a lot of ways, because when they come and they redevelop areas near the dike, they've been really, really helpful in helping us get the dike to where we need it to be and getting the setbacks so that we can build future dikes. So through redevelopment, we can accomplish quite a bit. The other thing we're trying to do, and largely through development again, is build out of the floodplain. I think a couple of people have talked about that, and we've seen a nice graphical presentation by, I think it was Steve there, that showed just lifting up the land, basically through development, requiring people to build out of the floodplain. And it's a good strategy, and eventually the island gets higher, but the challenge is, now we're talking about sea level rise. I think that I'm going to take another step back. Sea level rise is a reasonably recent topic, right? Like, I don't think anyone except maybe some people really in the know were talking about this 10 years ago. It's more like the last, well, maybe 10 years, maybe 7 years, people started getting pretty serious about it. And so the problem is, as we build out of the floodplain, what do you build to? Because tomorrow's floodplain elevation is going to be quite a bit different. To deal with the more frequent rainstorms or rain intensity, we're also doing a lot of drainage pump station updates. We have 39 drainage pump stations, and we rebuild one of them each year, and generally kind of make them quite a bit bigger and try and make them more suitable for what we think the future rainfall is going to be. We don't know what it is, but we can guess it's going to be more. Water metering doesn't seem obvious in this, but like when we had our drought in 2015, it's clear that the water resource is not unlimited. And through our metering programs and other water reduction programs, we're actually just trying to reduce the stress on that infrastructure. And we're doing an okay job at it. Like, the city's grown dramatically over the last 10 years or 15 years, and yet our water use is actually a little bit lower than it's ever been. So we consider that reasonably successful. And yeah, just a couple other water appliances and make them more efficient. And water pressure management's not another really obvious one, but basically the thought is most of your water systems are designed for the maximum summer day plus fire flow kind of thing. And to be honest, you just don't need all the pressure to drive that system in the wintertime when no one's doing any lawn irrigation or anything like that. And we found that just by lowering our pressure by 10 psi through the winter months, we actually reduce our overall water consumption by, it's like, I think it's about just a little over $1 million in metro terms, so probably 5% of our total water use. So we'll talk a little bit, well, wasn't certain how long this was going to be, so I've left a few slides here at the end to talk a little bit more about our dike infrastructure and sea level rise and such, because, like I said, it's very important to us. So this is basically Lulu Island, as Tamsin pointed out. If I actually had a floodplain map up here, that whole island would be blue. We're very different than Vancouver or Surrey that way. Like I said, no dike, no Richmond. We have 49 kilometers of dike around Lulu Island, 39 pump stations. So what's this curious line all about? Well, at the end of the day, we're facing two different flood scenarios in Richmond. One is from the sea, the Strait of Georgia, and this is where sea level rise becomes really important. And one is from the freshet, spring freshet on the Fraser River. And this is kind of the dividing line between what the governing event is at the end of the day. So the interesting thing about climate change is that one of the thoughts is that we'll have higher sea level rise. That'll impact this area more. But if climate becomes much warmer, we should have less snowpack in the interior, and maybe the freshet will become quite a bit smaller. So that's possibly one of the things that'll impact our dike decisions. I think I've already kind of gone over that. There's quite a bit of variability in this. Clearly, I think as others have pointed out, like this is 2100. Even the province's chart goes well beyond that. So the situation's a bit fluid. The current round of dike raising that we're doing to aim for 2100, it won't stop there. Someone after me is going to have to come along once we're complete our current program, probably over the next 20 or 30 years, and dream up a new program and keep it moving forward. Yeah, this is just a slide to talk about, when we're talking about sea level rise, there's other things going on too. We also have, I think someone else pointed out, Maggie might have pointed out that they had subsidence in their farmlands in Surrey, and we do as well. We sink, Richmond sinks at about 2 millimeters a year. And one of the things we've kind of learned from the Dutch actually is that the Dutch, they have a really neat chart that shows subsidence of the Netherlands versus ability to pump water, starting from windmills and coming all the way through to electric pumps. And what's amazing is they lowered their water table dramatically. Their rate of subsidence went way, way up. So one of the things we do, and quite consciously, is try and keep the water table in Richmond as high as we can to minimize this rate of subsidence, because of course, if you exacerbate that, like the whole thing becomes even less manageable. So at the end of the day, for a meter of sea level rise by 100 years, we're looking at 1.2 meters of dike raising, which gets us to our current target of 4.7, which geodetic, which is how what we think we need to make it to 2100. This is just a sort of a typical dike, and the big message here is 4.7 is our target. A lot of people will want to really put a fine point on this 100-year thing and argue about how high the dike should be to make that 100-year target. But our thought is a little bit more, well, let's pick a reasonable target for 100 years and recognize that we may hit that target sooner than 100 years or maybe longer than 100 years, depending how sea level rise manifests itself. So I think that's a really key thing, is that what we're doing, I think I have a slide here that says that. maybe after this, is really that you to be proactive about this. Like planning what you're going to do is really, really important. Like you can execute things reasonably quickly as long as you know what you're doing. So the big thing is to know what you're doing and have those plans in place, because those plans will help inform what your funding levels need to be, because that's the other thing you need to have in place in this variable kind of time variable situation, is you need to have your money together so that you can execute your plan when you need to execute it. And then ultimately you have to build the thing, right, before sea level rise inundates you, quite frankly. I think Steve Litkey's program showed us very well what the consequences of inundation in the lower mainland are, and they actually have a significant impact on the GDP of Canada, not just the people's livelihoods around here. And ultimately, a big thing in climate change, not just with sea level rise and such like that, is you need to understand your risk. Like we've said in a lot of other forums, everywhere, there's nowhere that you live that's without risk. So I think it's really, really important to understand what risks you face and mitigate them. And ultimately, you have to engage the council and community. Council really just represents the community, what the community wants. Like we were talking about pavement a little while ago. If the community wants pavement, that's what council will do, right? If the community wanted something that was a little greener, that's what they would do as well. They're really just voicing what the community wants. I mean, it was no surprise to me when the fellow from the Okanagan pointed out that all the tax dollars, all the funding dollars went to roadways because, well, that's what's getting people votes ultimately. And if you want to change that, you just have to start changing how people vote. And I think it's pretty much there. I can go back to this other slide and talk about our DEG master planning and the creative things we're doing, but we can leave that for another day, or if anyone has any questions about that, we can certainly go back to it. Thank you.
Very much. Okay, so we've got a little under 20 minutes for questions, so we'll just open it up and you can direct your question to one or another of the panelists. I'll start with you.
Thanks very much. I have a thorny question for Tamsin, actually. You made a really...
Me?
I'm sorry, Tamsin. Maggie.
Yes.
Pardon me. You made it's not as bad as it sounds. You made a really very interesting comment about resilience versus sustainability.
Yeah.
And one thing I've tended to think over the years is that sustainability is it's a very ethereal concept. It's really hard to come up with clear measures or even very clear indicators other than these very broad motherhood statements or wish lists.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to a client once, and I asked him why they had integrated planning into their OCP. And he says, well, the counselors went away to a conference, and back said it was a good idea, so we had to sprinkle it in there. Do you think resilience offers a more pragmatic and operational framework for guiding very practical or applied decision making either at the planning level or the engineering level?
I think that it is. I think that it is a really useful application at the engineering level, but what we're hoping with sustainability is to move beyond just what's operational. In the last update of the sustainability charter, we went out to the community. It was a much more community-oriented process to find out from our community partners and residents, well, what is the vision out to 2050, 2058? And it really is not just about resilience in terms. I mean, I think you can think of resilience more broadly, but it's also about inclusion and the kind of the socio-cultural side. We have education and arts that are integrated within that. And so, I mean, I think if you think about strong communities and being resilient, those pieces play a part in that, but I don't know if it's as obvious to people when you're talking about resilience. Like, people think about big disasters and how quickly you bounce back, right? So I think that resilience can be useful in thinking about, as I mentioned, kind of the many different futures, and then you can look at different decisions and say, well, how well would this stand up, in this future, in this future, in this future? And sustainability may not be as easy to apply in that way, but as an overarching concept, we found sustainability to be useful and then resilience to be embedded within that. If that answers your question.
It does.
Okay, yeah.
So we've got a question over here.
This is a question for Tamsin. So I was wondering, with the structured decision making that went on, how were each of the kind of environmental, social, and economic impacts weighted, and who was involved in that weighting?
So there was no weighting. That's kind of the magic of structured decision making, is the idea that nothing is more important than, you could weight them if you wanted to, but ultimately nothing is more important than something else. But you have to make value judgments then. So you have to say that someone's life is worth more than someone's house. And those kind of big picture value decisions are really difficult to make, at least as a consulting team. So before weighting could happen, you'd have to go to the public or to the decision makers at the City of Vancouver to apply them. So we didn't do that, and so all we were showing was the trade-offs between them. So the structured decision making doesn't bring you to one answer, it brings you to a discussion that hopefully creates a wholesome dialogue about what the trade-offs are between these different options. And then perhaps in the future, as we have more information, that preferred option might become more and more clear as all of those measures go blue, ideally.
Yeah, sure. I was wondering if each of the panelists wouldn't mind commenting on what you see as the relative awareness in your municipality to the risk associated with flooding and sea level rise. I mean, we're going to be visiting Crescent Beach a little bit later and hearing about the explicit engagement of community in a process of planning for that, and I don't know. I mean, Tamsin, I guess you're not necessarily intimately involved, but I think that you have some sense of the work.
I have a sense that it's not very good.
So how have you been involved in these municipalities in gauging public attitudes and awareness, and then what's your sense of what that level is?
So I can sort of quickly speak on the Vancouver experience, and that's my own personal experience of living there. No one knows, except for everybody who lives within a block of me, and they know intimately where the floodplain is. It's 3 blocks away. But in general, and this was work done by Waterloo recently to actually survey people's awareness of flood risk, and it is really, really low, even in places like Richmond. People don't realize that they're in a flood
A
plain.
national survey.
A national survey, yeah. So that I don't know if they published it yet, but it's kicking around. So we know that that's not. But and the City of Vancouver, I only know this because I received a Talk Vancouver thing in my inbox the other day asking me about what my awareness of sea level rise was. So I didn't answer it because I knew I'd skew the results. But they've actually just gone out in the last 2 weeks to ask that question. And they are now moving forward over the next few months. And this summer, they're starting a big engagement strategy. I can't really speak to that because I'm not them, but they are working on trying to improve that knowledge. However, what I would say is that at the city staff and city council level, there's an extraordinary awareness of climate issues in general and sea level rise, which I think is extremely helpful in terms of how we were able to frame our project. Because one of the things that we were able to do was actually look at retreat explicitly in our decision making. So the understanding that this is a huge risk that we're facing, and that one of the things we may have to do is make a really difficult decision about retreat, and the city council was okay with us doing that. So I think that sort of speaks really well to the level of understanding at that, in that work realm. But public understanding, not so much there.
Surrey or Richmond?
Yeah, Richmond, like I agree, like when you get out into the just everyone else in the community, unless you're within Tamsin's neighborhood, no one knows and no one actually cares, right? Like when you're in this business and you go to a cocktail party or a dinner party or something like that, like you can throw it out there, like no one's worried about it. In fact, I'd say very few people are even aware that sea level rise is a thing and that there's a debate on that. When you get to the council level, council's very aware and they're very supportive and they very much understand the risk of sea level rise. And to be honest, it's it's weird to go to council and you're getting one of my responsibilities is doing the utility budgeting and stuff like that, and that's the budgeting for the drainage and diking utility, and there's always asking, you sure you don't need more money? You don't need more money for that. And so it's a weird thing in a municipality for them to be aware enough that they're saying, you sure you wouldn't like to add more money to this right now?
Yeah, and I'd say in Surrey, similar in terms of staff awareness. I think that is pretty high and certainly has grown in the past few years as this work has unfolded. And I would say, in general, the same lack of awareness among the community in general, but for the 1,500 or so residents that are within the floodplain, and Kira, you may be able to speak to this more, having gone out to those communities so many times over the past decades or more. I think the awareness is actually quite high in Crescent Beach and in Bridgeview, but there are developments that are not in the floodplain, but on the edge of the floodplain, that are relatively new, and I would say in those communities the awareness is very low. So I think in the closer knit, more historically based communities, where we've been dealing with flooding and working with those residents for a long time, I think that they're quite aware.
And maybe just one thing I'll add is there are periodic opportunities for awareness. So I think of the 2007, there was elevated flood risk on the Fraser. There's a tremendous amount of pre-planning and media attention. I think that prompted a number of citizens, households to learn more from different sources of information like their municipality.
Yeah, and just to sort of build on what Steve's saying there, sort of speak out of turn, but that, like, if there's a disaster anywhere in the world, like when you have a tsunami or something like that in Japan, definitely there's a surge of people that have concern, but it's very short-lived. It lasts, maybe not months, but maybe like weeks, right? And then it's gone.
You have a question here?
Yeah, just speak to that as well. I led as a consulting team for the MyPG project that Leslie mentioned, and that followed not long after the major floods they have in Chaco, where it meets the Fraser, which is right where downtown Prince George is. The awareness there of the importance of climate change and its impacts on the city was huge. It lasted a little longer than the few weeks, but what it did is it brought the political capital and the support for staff to take the studies and so on that were done and drive them into policy. So that went into the sustainability plan and then into the official community plan and into engineering pieces. The hard part came 9 months to a year later when they had come back with diking plans, and the costs and benefits of that, sort of those protection measures, were hotly contested by people who lived quite close to the river and didn't want to see their properties affected, even though they knew if there was another flood that came along, their properties would be inundated again. So there's some real paradoxes in how people think and react to these longer term risks.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Inherent in flood management and with climate change, it is a new opportunity. It's bringing more attention, but it also makes it easier that'll happen later to somebody else, and it's easy to defer those tougher issues and discussions. Time for some more questions? Yes.
So I have a question for you. You said that you have to take the right time to put in actions so that you're not wasting fundings, but how do you decide when the right time is?
Right, so that's a really tricky question, and I didn't show you, but we actually sort of designed a tool for the city of Vancouver where we, for each important asset in the city, we've outlined when we think the water will first get to it, and when we think the water will be there 10%, 10% chance of happening every year, 50, those kind of numbers that Maggie has. So that for each asset in the city that's important, we've got this it's a very pretty purple graph with lots of information on it, which has also got a tool. And so the idea here is that we can ask the city what their risk tolerance is for that asset being underwater 10% of the year. And with that information, you can try and figure out when you need to have an implementation action in place. And then based on your preferred options, you've got to think about the longest time horizon you're going to need to put that action in place. So if you're looking at big long-term infrastructure cycles and turnover, well, we need like 50 to 70 years to turn over how buildings and houses are built. So that's our lead-up time. But if you're looking at a big piece of engineering infrastructure, like Lloyd said, if you know what you're doing, you can build it pretty quickly. But what you have to do is get the, the politics and the finances and all the design in place, and that can take years and years and years. So we've got these lead up times on some of these big project ideas, and then so we have when it has to be in place, how long it's going to take. So that's when your decision has to take place in terms of where you're going. And hopefully we'll have better information at that point and some great new innovation. And maybe we won't have to use the big piece of infrastructure that we have now, suggested as a preferred option.
Yeah, I think the other timing consideration is during redevelopment cycles. So if a home is going to be torn down and rebuilt, there's an opportunity to raise it above predicted flood levels, and same with infrastructure and redevelopment. If you're going to be replacing storm sewers and you're thinking about bigger pipes for more intense rain events, then it's going to be more affordable to do that when you're doing that work anyways, as opposed to rebuilding the current capacity and then having to redo that in 10 years or so. Yes?
Hi, Susan Todd, I'm a sustainability accountant. Anne's question, or answer to that question, I'm interested in the extent to which municipalities are factoring climate change into their asset management plan. Asset management is a big thing for municipalities these days. There's new accounting rules in place and things like that. And this is where municipalities are figuring out the condition of all their assets, their expected life, things like that. The expected life could be impaired by changes in climate. And I'm wondering, I don't know if we've got any asset managers here, but I'm curious if you know of how asset management is being handled.
Carrie can speak to
I'll
that.
take this one. So I run drainage asset here at the city. So we actually are not coining it asset management anymore. It's sustainable service delivery. How's that? Because we're trying to get away from the traditional life, this, that, and replace it the same old way. What do we need? Bring more of a risk approach into our assets. But that's where Maggie had said in Surrey, we actually have climate change as a factor in our 10-year plans. We have, with the BC government has that we'll have to do our capital depreciation and PSAP stuff. In that, we're depreciating our assets every year. We have to look at when we're renewing them. We have developed long-term plans, but climate change is a factor in them. And we have been adding it as line items in some of our stuff. And with the sustainability charter and with the OCP, a lot of it, so the thinking is changing. That is a factor in our asset management or sustainable services.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add on what Carrie was saying, that the assets themselves too are thinking about that uncertainty. So the sea dams, which are 110 years old, and hopefully we'll get to the end of this process before we have to rebuild them before they fail or something like that. But they're designed now so that the floodgates can actually be raised as sea level rise come up. The top is wide enough for a base that it could be built on top of. So thinking about how the assets themselves can be flexible with uncertainty and with change over time is another way that engineering and others have been trying to think about that.
Well, we've also built that in the pump stations.
And,
So
yeah.
all our new pump stations right now are being built for seismic. The seismic is also a new resiliency thing here in BC.
Yeah.
And then also, because pump stations take a long time to build, so critical infrastructure that takes a long time to rebuild, you want to have that so it's available for immediate use, right? Dikes are easy to build. So you have that, but also we have our pump controls. We looked at how long is this structure going to last. Pump station, usually your structure lasts 80 to 100 years. Sea level's going to go up in there. We have it so that the electrical controls can move up. We can change the pumps every 40 years. The pump shafts are long enough that we can change the pump that we need. So you've got to build, it's a different mindset, and you've got to kind of build that into your infrastructure because it goes against traditional replacement of how you would replace an infrastructure.
Yeah, just from Richmond's perspective, absolutely. Climate change and adaptation is part of the capital planning effort, right? At the end of the day, it kind of has three components when you're looking at infrastructure. One is just the aging infrastructure element, like how long does it last, when's it going to wear out, right? Then you have growth-based, like capacity-based issues. As communities grow, of course, they need bigger infrastructure to support the higher numbers of people. And the last thing is that we include in there is climate change, because certainly not necessarily all the infrastructure elements, but some of them, like the drainage elements in the pump stations and the dikes are all very, very influenced by climate change, and that has to absolutely be included in any asset management. We still call them asset management plans, and ultimately it can shorten the life. Like you might not get to the aging infrastructure life of something if climate change requires that you need more drainage capacity or something like that. But it's similar to development. You can kind of almost look at climate change in that same vein. So we get away from this thing where engineers can sit there and say, oh, this is going to last 100 years. And you have to kind of temper that with the thought that, well, we can build a bit more capacity into it now. And as Tamsin was talking about, like, we talk about the time value of money, like whether or not it's worth it to make it twice as big now, because you're putting a lot of capital in today that's got value that you might not want to sink into that, or do you want to build it a little bit bigger today and then maybe have to replace it again in 50 years or something like that? They're definitely all part of that strategy.
Can we take one more question? All right, I know we're having lunch, but go ahead, Kevin, keep it quick.
Sorry, just a very quick add-on to that. When we did the survey of adaptation in Canadian municipalities a couple of years ago, there was a follow-up conversation with the City of Toronto, which had undertaken an assessment of the vulnerability of the electrical system, only part of which they controlled. And the vulnerability of the public transportation, the major linchpin of the public transportation system, subways, to flooding was absolutely remarkable. And the level of lack of attention to the potential impact of flooding, right down to the vulnerability of the sump system, the transformers, to not knowing how long it would take to replace flooded transformers, or if there were enough sitting on pallets in a yard somewhere to do that, was absolutely shocking. And beyond that, there were systems that they couldn't control, like the systems run by Ontario Power Generation, but also the food supply system, the lack of backup generators, and the inability just to move food into supermarkets and so forth in a very short period of time, spoilage rates and all of that. But there are many different players beyond the municipalities that run services and systems that impact something as simple as having electricity to run systems, or whether there's a backup for that.
So